أناجي الحق في ليل بهيم أصدق النجوى وأدعو الله من قلب سليم يطلب التقوى أناجي الحق في ليل بهيم أصدق النجوى وأدعو الله من قلب سليم يطلب التقوى.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum, and welcome to Perspective. My name is Faizel Patel. The South African general elections are just 20 odd days away. Political parties and elections play an important role in the analysis of politics in developing countries, particularly in the analysis of democratization and specifically the consolidation of democratic political regimes. Now, among political scientists, the existence of free and fair elections on a regular basis is considered the minimal condition for a democracy or democratic regime. That's according to Dahl in 1971 and Diamond in 1999. Now, with more than 135 parties that have registered, and most of them on the campaign trail promising the world to get your vote, how do you decide who to vote for? To answer this question and give us more perspective, I am honored to have with me tonight Ebrahim Fakir, a renowned political analyst. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran for having me.
Tlakula. Okay, now South Africa celebrates 20 years of democracy this year. Why is this election particularly going to be the most contested since 1994?
Well, all elections are contested.
Yeah.
Elections are a contestation and a competition for political power. So, in a sense, all elections are contested, but I suspect that this election is considered to be among the more hotly contested ones because the assumption is that there are two new features of the political system. The first is that there are many more entrants to the political market. So there are more political parties contesting this time round than there may have been previously. And those are the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, who generated a lot more heat, and some would say a lot of heat but no light, and some would say, well, there's both a bit of heat and a bit of light. And then there's a Gang South Africa who, started off, got lots of media attention, but appeared of late to have really slacked off a little bit. So that's the one feature, the new entrance to the political market. The second is that it's the biggest, sort of almost largest youth bulge, which means largest set of new voters. And some people believe, well, they're going to have some determining effect on the political system because they aren't tied to any of the narratives of the past. They're not tied to an experience or a history of apartheid. They don't have the liberation legacy and hangover to worry about. So they've got a much more instrumental free vote which is floating around, which is up for grabs. Now, I'm not sure that's necessarily true because it makes an assumption that many of these young people, A, aren't socialized, they don't grow up in families, there's no historical knowledge which is passed down, but most importantly what it does is that it ignores the reality that most of these new young South Africans or first-time voters are actually experiencing the real effects of apartheid, and that colors the way in which they shape their political perspective. So it's both political socialization as well as real political experience of the history and the legacy of apartheid which is still living with us.
Okay. Now, last year you said political parties make two mistakes when it comes to young people, speaking on young people. They do not connect with the key issues that affect them and they treat them like a constituency. Do you think this is still relevant?
Undoubtedly. I'm not convinced anything has changed. The truth of the matter is that, if you're a woman and you make or you pronounce on certain policies which are focused on women, you are actually speaking to a fixed demographic who remain women forever.
Of course.
The youth is not actually a demographic, it is a phase of life. They literally will pass out of being the youth and will grow up into adults and will have different concerns. Now, there's a degree to which you've got to treat the youth both as a demographic but also merely as a phase of life. Now, there are particular challenges which young people face. Youth unemployment, the ability to upskill, accessing education, accessing jobs, social problems, in schools, drug, alcohol, and other abuse, relationships, the idea of a young person grappling with becoming a person entering and dealing with the world. So political parties obviously need to speak to those concerns. Now, when they A, don't speak to those concerns, and B, when young people don't actually see many of themselves represented in the political system. Yes. So many of them say, but we aren't holding office, we're not making the key decisions, we're not actually represented in the political system, why should we bother? And if you look at registration statistics of late, there's less than 60% of that demographic below the age of 35 who've actually registered to vote. And that has an effect on the fortunes of a party like the EFF, who believe that their constituency lies in the marginalized set of young South Africans. And there are two problems. A is that many of them won't satisfy the rudiments of registering for elections, which is a precondition for participation. And second, it's a fickle constituency. They may decide on the morning of the election, actually, we just don't feel like it today. So that's their second problem, and the hard work for them is to make sure that those who are registered, who are in their constituency, they actually get them out to vote.
Okay. Now, speaking on the young people again, observers believe young people are active on social media. Will this significantly influence this year's election?
There's a degree to which that may work, and there's a degree to which social media does has an influence, as all media does. Otherwise we wouldn't ourselves be sitting here doing this. So the media does have an effect. The truth of the matter is that penetration of access to internet, penetration of the web into society's grassroots, while better in South Africa than it is in the rest of the continent, doesn't really capture the full imagination and the full spectrum of young South Africans. It's becoming more important. Of course, mobile telephony is allowing Web 2.0 access on phones. So there's a larger demographic of young South Africans who are on it and who are accessing it. But it's not the primary and key mobilization tool as it might have been for Obama in the first American election, where he used it very, very successfully. But in South Africa, it's got limited appeal and it's got limited success, because literally in South Africa, you've got a dual society coexisting. And if you have a dual society coexisting, you've got to use dual methods of campaigning. So you have to, and you'll see political parties are doing this. They're not blind to this reality. That is that they will have to use traditional campaign media, go out door to doors, posters, rallies, picnics, and the ANC taps into popular youth culture, pop stars, parties, picnics, Harley Davidsons with campaign material. That kind of stuff appeals to young South Africans. So they've got to do that with a much more active social media presence. Right. So they're both important, but they're not decisive. Okay.
Now, there are a number of issues that are actually taking place at the moment. We have the Nkandla issue, we have the Vavi issue, and then we have the DA SMS campaign, which Judge Helens ruled last week against the ANC. Do you think that this will have a significant outcome on the election, or your comments on that?
Fundamentally what's at contestation here in the ANC and the DA court case is hinging on a matter of fact. And the matter of fact is, in terms of the electoral code of conduct, you can't use campaign media or a campaign message which is fundamentally untrue. Yeah. So the test for the judge here is that would a reasonable person, on the basis of the Public Protector's report and the Security Cluster Minister's report, make a safe assumption? And would an ordinary person say that we can read in these two reports that actually the president did unduly benefit? But what is the wording used in the DA's SMS campaign? That wording actually says the president stole your money. Now, can a reasonable person make that inference? Does undue benefit equal to conscious stealing of the money? That's where the appeal is going to rest on. Of course, it's a very narrow appeal. I think the ANC ought to have let this ride, because I don't think that the DA was going to meet and greet a greater number of potential voters who are going to vote DA than those who already might have done so. The reality of the matter is that in South Africa, political identities are relatively fixed. Of course they can change, especially in metropolitan areas like Gauteng. But largely, political identification is quite close. If you see yourself represented in a party, they speak to your aspirations, you see yourself reflected in their values, that's the party you'll eventually vote for.
Do you think so close to elections, should the two top main parties, if you want to put it that way, be sort of quarreling over petty differences, if you want to put it that way?
You know, it appears as if they do, but there are fundamental issues for our society at stake. So if you take the DA's march to the ANC, I think the ANC's approach to it was all wrong. You know, they may have been technically correct, but the moral high ground was won, unfortunately, by the DA on that question, because you can't tell people where they must go and campaign, how they must campaign, who they must target their message to. And strategically, the ANC actually didn't really win anything massive. What surprises me is, given the broad amount of social support that the ANC does have, as well as the immense amount of political power, why they behave so unconfidently, I don't know. But it is important. There's important lessons for fundamental freedoms in our society: the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, the freedom of organization. Now, you know, one doesn't want to have unreasonable limits imposed on those. In a free, open and democratic society, you want to allow sufficient space and freedom for people, no matter how misguided or no matter how few the effects might be, that they have the right to do so. They should be able to do so.
Right. We're speaking to Ebrahim Fakir. We're going to go for a break. We'll be right back after this. Stay tuned.
أصدق النجوى وأدعو الله من قلب سليم يطلب التقوى إلهي صرت في ظرف عصيب فاكشف البلوى فيا ربي.
Welcome back to Perspective. This evening we're speaking to Ebrahim Fakir, a renowned political analyst, and we're talking elections 2014 come May 7th. Now, Ebrahim, former Minister Ronnie Kessels and Deputy Health Minister Nosizwe Madlala Rutledge have reportedly asked South Africans to take a stand against fraud and corruption by spoiling their votes. Now, the two are gathering support for the Sidikwe Vukani, which means we are fed up, wake up, Vote No campaign launched at Wits. That was on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. Your comments on that? Do you think it's wise calling on South Africans to spoil their votes instead of voting for another political party?
Look, it's a free society. If you want to spoil your vote, you know, go out and spoil your vote. If you want to stay away, stay away. I mean, I do think that they're irresponsible, but they're not ethically indefensible. I do, however, concern about the spoiling of the ballots, and let me tell you why. Because, you know, when you spoil your ballot, you are actually turning out to vote. So you're counted off on the voter register as having appeared and has turned out. So you're contributing to a higher turnout, right? But when you spoil your ballot's not going to any one of the parties. So in effect, what you're doing is you are waiting, because we have a pure proportionate system. So in the mathematics of it, when you distribute the seats according to the proportions, though the ANC will win the election, the weight of opposition voters would go up. That's if all the spoiled ballots would have been potentially ANC voters. It would have weighted those votes higher, and in the distribution of seats, they would get 3 or 4 more seats than they ordinarily would have got, because their proportions suddenly start going higher. Their proportions come down even though they win.
Of course.
Right? But you're still contributing to turnout. And when you have a spoiled ballot, we don't know whether the ballot is spoiled because of a case of illiteracy, because there was poor voter education, or because there was insufficient civic education, or because someone was blurry when they went in, or because they couldn't see properly. So there's any number of reasons why you would spoil a ballot. It's just a mistake. We're not definitively saying something. If you had an option on the ballot paper which says none of the above, and a large number of people chose none of the above, then we get a clear message that this is about distrust in the system. Now, if you don't turn out at all, rather than spoil your ballot, then you are sending a fairly definitive message. And that definitive message is one of two things. Either that you are apathetic, and if you are apathetic, it's irresponsible, but it's not ethically indefensible. You could be apathetic because you believe the political system doesn't bring you anything, that your rights are still, you can still exercise them, and you can still exercise your responsibilities in the way in which you feel like doing so, and that's fine. But the second is that you're saying that there's distrust in the system, and those who govern would take both of those seriously if you have a lack of turnout. Now, if the turnout is low, you're sending a definitive message. If you're spoiling your ballot, we're not sure whether this is attributable to one of 6 different reasons or just a simple mistake. So I would rather you just not turn out rather than spoil a ballot.
On that, do you think, I've heard in mainstream media during the week that is because Ronnie Kestrels might be disgruntled with the ANC?
Well, that may well be true. They certainly are disgruntled, as many people are disgruntled. The problem for me, however, on an ethical, moral basis, is this. These guys are saying we were unaware of the kind of problems which were going on under the Mbeki government. But you were in the Mbeki government, right? And you're saying we didn't know about bad policy on HIV/AIDS. We didn't know about corruption in the arms deal. We didn't know when they were warned quite fundamentally in 2000, 2001 about investment in capital expenditure in electricity generation. They claim we didn't know any of these things. We left with the legacy of what that administration did back then. What if the same set of people now claim, well, we didn't know what was going on in Kandla, the reports are unclear, why should we believe them? So unfortunately, strategic as Ronnie Kestrel's call might be and appropriate as it might be, I do think it's a case of sour grapes.
All right. Now, another issue that's been all plaguing, South Africa at the moment is political parties formed a forum led by Bantu Olomisa from the UDM, asking Penzi Tlakula to step down because of the Public Protector's report on the leasing scandal. Now, do you think this is politicking and it will compromise the elections anyway?
Look, I do think it's politicking, but I don't think it's going to compromise the elections fundamentally in any meaningful way, for several reasons. One is that it's not just the Public Protector's report, but there's also a report from Treasury, which has come from PricewaterhouseCoopers, saying that there was something fairly irregular which was done by her. However, what she's done is she's reported and taken this matter to court. So effectively, it's sub judice. Now, it does cast a pall of credibility over the IEC, but I wouldn't worry too much because the oversight mechanisms are sufficiently robust if we are afraid that the elections will be tampered with. And what are those oversight mechanisms? Well, for one, there's multi-party liaison committees which political parties are regularly a part of. The second is that there's conflict management panels. The third, very importantly, is that all political parties have the right to have what they call party agents in every voting station. And they sign off at the beginning of voting that the ballot boxes are empty, the boxes are not sealed, no ballots are stuffed, and then they sign off on that. They stay and watch the proceeding throughout the day. At the end of the process, all of the seals have to be broken in their presence. They've got to sign off on it, and they watch the count. They then tabulate the result at every polling station. And they can cross-check and verify whether the results tally or not. So there's 4 extensively developed mechanisms. Ultimately, if all fails, there's the electoral court. Now, I don't think that the credibility of one individual is going to mess up a process which is dependent on close to 250,000 people to run in a credible way. Often, political parties, I think, make this preemptive strike because I think they are not as confident as they set out by saying, we're going to perform very well. Now they don't and they have an excuse.
Yes. Now, I just want to go back quickly to the EFF and the tripartite alliance. We know with COSATU that the ANC is sort of mediated between them. Now, in this week as well, on Monday, Julius Malema was speaking about forming his own union. Quickly, your comments on that one?
Look, it's a free industrial relations system. You can form a union. Everyone has a right to do so. Workers require protection. But, the difficulty is you now have big COSATU-affiliated unions. You'll have a set of other unions. It creates instability in the labor relations sector. Collective bargaining takes a knock. Employers will be caught in a perpetual round of negotiation from union federation to union federation to union federation. And that you don't want because you want some predictability in the labor market. You want some central bargained negotiations which happen and then which apply across the board so that the economy can keep ticking over.
Now, a few weeks ago in the Sunday Times, they ran a poll where it said that the ANC will likely get 2/3, the DA only grow by about 7 or 8%. What does this tell us about the state of opposition politics?
Well, it's fragmented and is likely to fragment more when you've got the entrance of two opposition political parties. Now, of course, all this depends on the stay away, whether, to what extent traditional ANC voters will stay away because they're disillusioned, or the extent to which they'll choose one on the menu of opposition parties. But unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, and it's haram, by the way, to tell the future. So I don't know how this is going to turn out. But, the trends appear to be suggesting to us that this is not the election in which there's going to be cataclysmic shift or change. And I suspect what will happen is that the ANC, over the last two elections, have successively shed a percentage or two of support. They will continue to do that. They'll go down to about 63, perhaps 64. The others will be shared amongst the other opposition parties. The DA will increase by a small margin. And the other parties will share the spoils that remain. And many of the opposition parties, let's be frank, are niche parties, have a very small, very well-defined constituency. They're almost special interest groups. And in a pure proportional representation system, I'm not sure that they bring too much benefit, especially when you're dealing with a large monolith like the ANC. Yes. But let's see what happens to the monolithic ANC now. They've got problems in their alliance, no doubt, but the DA is having its own internal fractures too. They've also got their own ideological problems. They've also got internal fights for position. And the EFF, no matter how well they do now, are faced with two problems. Because, look at what the EFF is. It's a party of a hodgepodge of different kinds of ideologies and personalities. And they're facing two problems. One is if they do very well, there'll be a competition and contestation over position and over control over resources. If they don't do very well, then the different constituents who make it up, the little hodgepodge, are going to fight each other and engage in a blame game of saying we didn't do very well because you guys didn't do this, and those guys say you didn't campaign hard enough, and those guys said, well, you sent out all the wrong messages. So one way or the other, they've got to keep this thing cohesive. And they face two dangers: a fight for position and control of resources, or engage in the blame game if they don't do very well.
Okay, Ebrahim, we just got 2 minutes left. How do you see the outcome of the elections? We've got less than 20 days left. People are going to go to the polls. They're going to cast their ballots. What are your predictions, or how do you see the outcome?
I don't see the outcome because we'll have to wait to see what voters actually say. I don't think there's going to be a fundamental shift. I doubt there's going to be a complete sea change. I think the holding patterns will remain for now. You might have a little more strength in the opposition. But with that strength will also come a greater amount of fragmentation. There's one significant feature of the past parliament, though, and that is that you have cohesion amongst opposition groups on things like the Protection of State Information Bill, the Traditional Courts Bill, on Kandla. So they'll find issues on which to cooperate on. But I think the one thing we mustn't lose sight of is that opposition is not only expressed through political parties. We've had opposition expressed on the streets of this country for close on to more than a decade. In fact, we've got historical trajectories for the way in which political organization and expression is happening on the streets in the same way in which it happened under apartheid.
Ebrahim, Tlakula, for a very informative analysis on the elections, and I guess we'll see you at the polls.
Shukran, Jazakallah, thanks for having me.
Jazakallah for having me. Well, that's Ebrahim Fakir, a political analyst, giving us some perspective on the upcoming elections on the 7th of May. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of another edition of Perspective. Join me again next week as we bring you more informative programs at this hour on ITV. From myself, Faizel Patel, and the great team here at ITV, fi amanillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أناجي الحق في ليل لهيم أصدق النجوى وأدعو الله من قلب سليم يطلب التقوى أناجي الحق في ليل لهيم أصدق النجوى وأدعو الله من قلب سليم يطلب التقوى سرت في ظرف عصيب فاكشف البلوى فيا ربي أنا عبد لرد الطيم لا يقوى